If you've watched any of my other bread videos, you've noticed that I seem a little bit obsessed with kitchen scales and bread machines, and you may think that's a personal preference, but if you're new to making bread, I actually consider both tools essential to your success. Now, I'm going to talk about some common objections that people have to making their own bread, and then I'm going to explain how those objections relate to having a kitchen scale and bread machine. So the first objection I think a lot of people have is that they think that making your own bread is too time consuming. And while this can certainly be the case, I feel that that is totally not going to be a problem when you have these two tools. It takes me about 10 minutes to make my own bread as far as the amount of time I'm investing in it. And that's all because of these two tools. So dinner rolls will take longer because you have to individually shape each roll. But your standard loaf of bread goes very quickly because of these tools. So time is probably the only legitimate excuse that people have to not making their own bread, but that's pretty much canceled out by the savings. I save about, compared to the grocery store prices for an all-natural loaf of bread, I calculate that it costs me less than $1 in ingredients and probably exactly $1 by the time you factor in the electricity that my bread machine's using and the natural gas my oven is using. So if I'm making bread for $1 and it costs about $2.50 at the store, that's a saving of $1.50. And when you're making even fancier breads like dinner rolls or dessert breads, the savings are even greater. The second objection that I think a lot of people have is that they just think that bread is too temperamental and difficult to make. And that is certainly true if you have no experience. It's very challenging, but that's where these two tools make a huge difference. And I'm going to explain how. There's 3 factors that these tools dramatically help with, which are very critical factors for successful bread. The first is proportion control, and that's where the scale comes in. The second is temperature control. A bread machine handles that. The third is effective kneading. The bread machine also handles that. Let me explain how a kitchen scale deals with the proportions. A lot of people complain when they make bread because the dough comes out too wet or too dry, and that's because people measure their ingredients differently. Some people will spoon their flour into the measuring cup and then level it. Other people will scoop directly out of the container and then level it. Finally, some people will sift their flour into their measuring cup and then level it. Believe it or not, all 3 methods produce dramatically different amounts of flour. Not to mention that if they're measuring wet ingredients, they might use a traditional dry measuring cup or a liquid measuring cup, and that's going to give you different amounts depending on where on the line it can change. So a scale takes away all of that. I use grams because they're smaller than ounces and I don't have to put decimal points in my recipes. But basically you can understand how effective a scale is when you think about the fact that, let's say you're making a salad. I know that's not bread, but you're making a salad and the recipe that you have calls for 1 bunch of kale. I'm always asking the question, what is your grocery store's bunch compared to my grocery store's bunch? I've bought huge bunches of kale and I've bought small bunches of kale. Now imagine if that same recipe said 150 grams of torn kale leaves. That recipe is going to come out the same every time, and you're not going to wonder if you have the right amount. In the same way, it doesn't matter how you measure, whether you're using a measuring cup and scooping or whatever, if you have it in grams, it's going to be consistent every time, and that's going to get rid of that problem. The other beautiful thing about a scale is that if I want somewhere in between a half cup and 2/3 of a cup, which would be 7/12 of a cup and doesn't exist as far as I know, it's not a problem if I'm weighing in grams. I can just put whatever amount that is in grams and my recipe will come out the same every time without any problems. So that's how a kitchen scale solves a proportion issue. As far as temperature control, if you haven't watched my yeast video, temperature is very critical for the yeast being active and happy. And a bread machine actually warms the dough to the right temperature for you. You don't even have to worry about it. Kneading is the third issue that it solves. It kneads the dough perfectly, and kneading is probably the number one most time-consuming and exhausting thing that someone has to do when they make bread. So bread machine, kitchen scale solves both of those. Now you may be thinking, well, I cannot afford a kitchen scale and bread machine. Believe it or not, the combined cost of these is about $60 for a perfectly effective bread machine and kitchen scale. You can afford that when you think about the fact that you're saving about $1.50 per loaf. In just 40 weeks, which is less than a year, you've paid off both of these and you're getting fresh bread, which is priceless. So the bottom line is that having both of these tools turns a complicated process into a very easy process. And it reduces the time that you're interacting with the bread, for me, from about 45 minutes to 10 minutes. That's huge. If you are clueless how a bread goes from a lump of dense dough into fluffy yumminess, then I recommend you watch my videos Gluten Monster and Ravenous Yeast, because they will explain, and knowing how the process works will cause you to be so much more successful. So I wish you the best of luck as you make your own bread. Thanks for watching.